Good afternoon, everyone. It's so good to be here at Google. My name is Elmira Bayrasli. I'm here to talk about my book, From the Other Side of the World, Extraordinary Entrepreneurs, Unlikely Places. It's a book that profiles 7 entrepreneurs from 7 different countries, overcoming 7 different obstacles. And the journey that actually took me there is one that actually did not start from entrepreneurship. It started from a place where I have been passionate about foreign policy. And that passion for foreign policy very much comes along with my own personal story. My parents are immigrants from Turkey. They immigrated from Turkey to here, to New York City, where I grew up, just across the bridge in Brooklyn, New York. And as I think just both being here in New York City, but then also being the child of immigrants, you're very much made aware of the rest of the world. Always constantly questions about where are you from, and making trips to Turkey, and really understanding that there was a world beyond New York City and beyond the United States. And I think that curiosity took me on a journey where I was very interested in international relations and trying to understand, well, what were all the problems that were happening in places like Turkey, which for a long time really suffered from a lot of economic backwardness. I remember going on trips to Turkey as a child where there were no telephones. Television would come on at 8 p.m. at night, which I thought was completely bizarre. There was very bad infrastructure. Roads were a lot of dirt roads. There were single lane roads. And all of these things really stood out in my mind. And so from the earliest of ages, I thought, well, how do you make countries like Turkey become like the United States? And so that question right there itself put me on this journey where I went and I studied political science. I went to NYU where I got a degree in political science, and then I did a graduate degree at Columbia where I focused it on specifically the Middle East. And I ended up working at the State Department. At the time that I graduated from both NYU and Columbia, the State Department was really the only opportunity that you had to actually really work internationally. Globalization was just getting off the ground. There was certainly no internet. Multinational companies had not been multinational. Certainly you could find Coca-Cola in Africa, Asia, Latin America, and the Middle East. But there wasn't this phenomenon where companies were actually doing business in different places. And so I took my degrees and I went to the State Department, where I actually got to work on the issues that I thought really were going to change the world. And we hear this word a lot, especially in the startup space, about changing the world. And I believe that that could actually only happen through government, through working at the State Department. And I got to work on things like Iraq, Bosnia, Rwanda, Kosovo. And it was a really eye-opening experience being on the front lines and working on those issues and developing the policies that were affecting these places. And I was so excited about doing that I actually decided in 2002 to pick up and move to Sarajevo, where I got to actually work on the issues that I was working on in Washington, D.C. I got a position working at the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, which is the largest international body working in Bosnia-Herzegovina, working on post-conflict rehabilitation. So the OSCE was working on things like property return and rebuilding the education system and working on civil society development. And that was just, I thought this was it. I was on the front lines, and this is exactly the things that I wanted to do. Except when I went out and I talked to people throughout the country in Bosnia, people always came back and told me the same thing. The one thing that they would remark is, we need jobs. How can you help us create jobs? And you hear this question a lot, and it's certainly something that wasn't unfamiliar to me, having been here in the United States. I think we hear about jobs in political elections a lot. It's certainly something that matters to all of us. But it did this question of job creation and how it matters to development and countries like Bosnia and really to the world really hit home when I actually went out to Eastern Bosnia and I came across an older woman who really literally berated me. and we were doing a civil society development project. And she said to me, you know, civil society and these concepts of democracy and human rights that you talk to us about, that's easy for you to talk about coming from America. She said, but you don't realize that our fathers, our husbands, our sons, our daughters actually have to leave Bosnia in order to have a job, in order to earn some money. They're leaving, and when they leave, we can't actually repair anything that has happened here. So can you think about how can you help us create jobs? And that really spoke to me. And I thought, well, okay, well, how do you create jobs? I had no idea. I hadn't thought about business at all. The internet had it exploded in popularity, and I thought, okay, well, certainly technology has to be a part of this. And so I embarked on this journey to find out how do you create jobs. Now, I think when everybody thinks about creating jobs, they think about starting a business. And this word I had heard about this word entrepreneurship, and entrepreneurship has certainly become popular. In fact, I actually think it's become, you know, this big trend that everybody has romanticized. And I had just assumed that if you were an entrepreneur, you were small business. And I thought, okay, well, let's figure out how to do this. I came back to the United States, and I started on this journey about how am I gonna learn about doing this. And I started working at a nonprofit organization headquartered here in New York City that works with entrepreneurs globally. And one of the countries that they work with is Turkey, which is a country that I know quite well. And I started working at this organization, helping them with their media and communications, with their writing, which is something that I excel at. So I wrote a book. But I hadn't known anything about entrepreneurship and what it really was. To me, entrepreneurship was you set up a business, you raise some money, and that was about it. That's kind of what encapsulated what entrepreneurship is. My aha moment, and one of the first lessons that I want to share with you, so I want to share with you 4 takeaways from my experience of writing this book. My aha moment came when I actually went to Turkey, and I had gone to Turkey, and I went out to eastern Turkey, to a city named Kars, which is on the border of Turkey and Armenia. And I went out to Kars after reading Orhan Pamuk's book, Snow. Orhan Pamuk is a Nobel laureate, and he wrote this book, Snow, that's set in Kars. Set in the 20th century, it's a love story, I highly recommend it. But in the book, he talks about how backwards Kars is. And he talks about, you know, the dirt roads that I remember as a child. And he talks about a woodblock press that the local newspaper in Kars was using up until about early 2000. And I had an opportunity to actually talk to Pamuk about this, and I thought, you know, as a writer, the way that you describe this and you use that detail of this newspaper press was so brilliant that you put that in there, because it really gave you a sense of how backward this place is when the rest of Turkey has become so commercialized, it's become so advanced. Turkey has become a member of the most powerful global economies in the world. And he said, I didn't actually make that up. That's actually true. You should actually go see it. So I decided, okay, I'm going to go out to Kars, and I'm going to go see this woodblock press. So I go out to Kars. I arrive in the second closest city to Kars, because there were no direct flights at the time, and it's about a 2-hour drive from Erzurum to Kars. So I don't arrive in Kars until about midnight. I speak Turkish. And if anybody knows anything about Turkish culture, it's a very conservative culture where men and women are, for the most part, segregated. There are certain notions about a woman's place and what is proper. And so for me to show up as a Turkish woman at this hotel, which is a dilapidated hotel, paint was peeling. There were a bunch of mustached men sitting in the lobby, smoking their Marlboros. And there's this silence when I walk in and I ask for a room. Because what would a proper Turkish girl be doing arriving in Kars at midnight? What possibly could she want? And so the hotel clerk was actually very curious about what I was doing there, and I just kind of dodged his question. I got the key to my room, and I went up. I went up and settled into my room. But of course, I couldn't sleep, and I decided, okay, I'm gonna log what I'm writing, because this is gonna be my big literary adventure. I'm gonna go on the trek of Orhan Pamuk, and I'm gonna record what I'm doing. And I pop open my laptop, and I start writing. And then all of a sudden, a thing comes up on my computer and says, choose the Wi-Fi network of your choice. And I thought, Wi-Fi? How in the world does this place have Wi-Fi? It's such a, I just didn't expect it. It was in the middle of nowhere, and so I hadn't expected it. And I was so excited that I wanted to run down and say, like, talk to the front desk clerk. So I ran out into the hall, and I looked at the Wi-Fi, and I noticed that it was made by a company called AirTies. AirTies is a wireless router company that also makes wireless routers, but it also makes set-top boxes. And the founder is a Turkish entrepreneur who spent most of his career actually in Silicon Valley working on microchips and hardware for wireless communication. And I was so excited about this. So the next morning I go back down, and the desk clerk, again, he's very curious. He's pressing me, and he's talking to me like, what are you doing here, and what are you trying to find here? And I said, actually, I have a question for you. I'm really impressed that you have Wi-Fi. And he looked at me, and all of his curiosity turned into such enthusiasm. And he said to me, oh my God. He said, do you know that the Wi-Fi is made by a Turk? And I thought, oh my God, how did he know that a Turk is behind this company? And I was taken aback. And he started talking about Bülent and Bülent's story. He said, yes. He said, it's AirTies. And apparently, he said to me, this man was living in the United States. He had immigrated from Turkey to Silicon Valley. He said he came back to Turkey to create this company. He said, can you believe that? And I thought to myself, I hadn't really thought about it. And what I told him is, I can't believe that you're telling me this. And he said, our country is changing. He said, I can't believe that this man would come back here to start this company. He said, you know what? He said, I think I'm going to go and study engineering. And I'm going to think about starting a company here. To me, that was my aha moment where I realized this is what entrepreneurship is about and what people are getting excited about. Because I grew up going to a Turkey where everybody wanted to leave. Everybody either wanted to go to Europe or everybody wanted to come here to the United States. And you know why they wanted to? Because there were no jobs. My parents came to the United States because they needed jobs. And my father came here to actually be an entrepreneur. And here was a young person in the eastern part of the country where there aren't a lot of job opportunities, but he was excited at the prospect that he could actually create them. And I thought, well, here is why everybody's getting excited about entrepreneurship, because it allows people to gain control of their own income and their own future. So, I thought, okay, well, here's what the answer is. And so I set about my journey to find out, well, what is happening around the world and how are entrepreneurs doing it? Because when you think about entrepreneurship here in the United States, you automatically think of Google. You think of the technologies that have come out of Silicon Valley. You think of the icons, not only of Larry Page and Sergey Brin, but you think about Steve Jobs. You think about Mark Zuckerberg, and you think about Facebook, and you think about all these big technology companies. When you say the word entrepreneurship, whether it's in a place like Turkey, or whether it's in Africa, Asia, or Latin America, entrepreneurship takes on a different notion. It takes on this notion that people are just doing something small. I think microfinance has become very associated with entrepreneurship outside of America. And it's this sense that if you're outside of the United States, you're only doing something micro. You're starting a business, and that's really about it. There's no talk of innovation. There's no talk of venture capital. There's no talk of this word scale. And there's certainly no talk of this word unicorn or technology. And I thought, well, certainly Bülent saw something in Turkey when no one else did. He started his company in 2004, and you have to remember, technology has really expanded in the decades since Bülent started his company. And when you talk about technology in a place like Turkey today, it's not so unusual, but in 2004 it was. Turkey had not really become the economic power it had. And so why did he take that risk? Why did he recognize that he could actually build a scalable company that has received a considerable amount of investment? So I decided to go around the world and really understand what has been holding entrepreneurs back everywhere else in the world. And what I came across is this concept of that obstacles are really key. So we talk about talent, we talk about innovation, but that's not something that we in the United States have a monopoly on. I actually have to say I think that there are talented and innovative people all around the world, but what's been holding them back has been obstacles. Now, every entrepreneur faces obstacles in starting his or her business. But the 7 that I actually focus in on in my book are ones that I found to be true throughout every single one of these countries. And ones that certainly are starting to pop up here in the United States. So I look at the lack of talent, where there's a lack of skill talent, lack of managerial talent. I look at poor infrastructure. That's certainly something that has held a lot of countries back, where the electricity doesn't work and the roads are bad. I take a look at the lack of collaborative space, which was an interesting insight for me, and I'll talk a little bit about that in just a bit. I also take a look at the role and effect that monopolies and big businesses have had on the ability for people, whether it be in Mexico or Nigeria, to be able to start businesses, establish businesses, preventing others from actually scaling up. I take a look at corruption and the effects that corruption have on the ability of people to start and scale their businesses. I take a look at the rule of law, and we actually don't really consider the law and regulation and the justice system as being a key component of entrepreneurship, but it really is. And the last thing I look at is the status quo, and how the status quo is actually really a huge obstacle, not only around the world, but it's actually becoming a really big obstacle here in the United States. And so I look at these obstacles, and certainly my obstacle of poor infrastructure, I think, it was, where do I start with that? And where I actually did start with that is I went to Nigeria. And here was the interesting thing that I came across. I went to Nigeria, where I think Africans have long struggled with poor infrastructure, whether it be corroded bridges and poor portways, bad roads. And I thought, well, here is one of the things that's really holding Africans back, and particularly in Nigeria. So I went around in Nigeria and I talked to a lot of people. And one entrepreneur that I actually came across, Tayo Avisu, he runs a company called Paga. Paga is a mobile payment company. And I was talking to Tayo about, well, how do you overcome this problem with infrastructure? It's really one of the challenges, don't you think, that's holding Nigeria back, it's holding Africa back. And, Tayo, being the gentleman that he is, he nodded to me, and I kind of understood from his nod. It's just like, oh, here's this white girl in Africa, and she thinks she actually knows what our problems are. And what I didn't realize is that I didn't really understand what the problems in Nigeria were. So poor infrastructure is certainly something that's held Nigerians back, but it was only spending time with Tayo, and here is my second point, my second aha moment, my second revelation, is that what you might think is a problem might only be a symptom. And entrepreneurs, the really successful ones, aren't the ones that actually go after the symptom. They're the ones who are actually digging down deep, really understanding what the challenges in their communities are, and solving that true problem. And I realized this when I actually went with Tayo around to understand how his company Paga works. Everybody's excited about digital payments around the world, mobile money. The mobile phone, in particular, when you talk about Africa, everybody's excited about the potential that the mobile phone has to help Africans leapfrog because they had bypassed the Industrial Revolution, but to actually leapfrog and build their economies and really become part of this globalized 21st digital economy. And for the most part, mobile money has helped Africans and Nigerians a tremendous amount. One of the challenges that you have in Nigeria is that a majority of people don't have access to banks. And so this concept of people holding onto money where you have the cliche of, I store my money in my mattress, that happens to actually be true for most people in Nigeria. They don't have access to banks. The number of banks, particularly in rural areas, is very, very low. So people are literally holding on to hoards of cash. They either have it at home or they have it on their person. And what happens in a situation where you're actually holding on to this money is that you're creating a tremendous amount of insecurity. But what I also realized is that when you're holding on to a lot of this cash, is that you're actually not, cash becomes transactional. And you're not using money as an asset to be invested. So people either want to have it or get rid of it. They don't want it to hold on to it and go back into the society where it's actually going into things like the development of roads or the improvement of electricity and the cleaning up of the streets. Now, certainly, there's other factors involved in trying to have those things move forward. But what Tayo actually tapped into, which a lot of other people across Africa have tapped into, the key for mobile money, is that the problem in a place like Nigeria is when people are holding on to that money and money is not building as an asset and it's not being leveraged, it's creating the problem of poor infrastructure. So the real problem in Nigeria is a lack of a financial infrastructure. This lack of a financial framework where actually people could store their money safely, take it out, and for it to build so that people can save and they can invest and they can do all of these things. And I realized that not only in talking to Tayo, but seeing how this mobile money payment system works. And the way it works is I can send you a payment phone to phone, and we have those services here in the United States. But here in the United States, it's just an electronic transaction. So it goes from me to you, and then you to me, or I can pay my Uber, or I can pay for my lunch, and that's it. In a place like Nigeria, there's still the problem of cashing in and cashing out, because you still have to remember there's this lack of banks. And so they have all of these agents around in the country. There's thousands of agents that Paga uses. People who run storefront shops, people who are selling newspapers, people who are selling T-shirts, people who are selling groceries. And these people act as cash in and cash out points. And what I actually realized is that these individuals are starting to actually create what would have been bank branches and an infrastructure to allow people to actually store their money and keep it safe. And they're helping to solve this problem of a lack of a financial infrastructure in very incremental ways. I think there are a lot of still challenges with mobile money where it still doesn't allow people for the opportunity to take out loans and to create an insurance system. And there's still other elements of financing that people haven't really considered that banks do and a financial system does. But really spending time with Tayo made me realize that entrepreneurs are not individuals who are simply setting up a business to get money. They're actually solving a core problem and addressing an issue that's changing the socioeconomic landscape in their countries. They're making it possible for people to move into either the middle class or move forward further. And that is kind of what the big differentiator of an entrepreneur is from a small business owner or somebody who opens up just a diner or a mom and pop shop. So I take this knowledge and I'm excited. I'm like, okay, so now I kind of really get this. So entrepreneur is not a small business. They're solving problems. They're moving the needle forward. And so I go to India. And I go to India and I come across an entrepreneur named Shafi Mathur. Shafi Mathur started a for-profit ambulance company in Mumbai. And I thought, well, I really want to talk to this guy Shafi because who in the world would start a for-profit ambulance in Mumbai? That just sounds like there's a good story there. And there is, because Shafi started this company not because he was a doctor, not because he was working as a paramedic. He actually had no background in healthcare whatsoever. His mother, one night after he and his family had dinner, started choking. And they all started to panic. They didn't know what to do. Nobody knew what the Heimlich maneuver was. She was choking, she was gasping for air. So what Shafi did was he did something that I think any of us here in this room would do. He picked up the phone to call India's equivalent of 911. Except no one picked up the phone on the other end. The phone kept ringing and ringing. And after a few minutes, which is actually a considerable amount of time when someone is in a distressed situation, as Shafi's mother was, he hung up and he decided, I'm going to take my mother, I'm going to put her in my car, and I'm going to rush her to the hospital. She was okay. But that event really shook Shafi to the core. And he thought, here I am. Shafi was a management consultant in one of the big consulting firms in Mumbai. And he had studied business here in the United States. He had gone to school in the UK. And he'd been interacting. He travels globally, right? He's a management consultant. So he's interacting with people around the world. And everywhere he went, everybody kept talking about, well, how India is the Asian tiger. India is one of the most powerful economies of the world. We have to pay attention to what India is doing. India's made it. It's become one of the go-to countries that if you want to talk to the big players around the world, you go and you talk to India. And he thought, how can we actually be this global power that everybody is talking about when we can't even call for an ambulance? And he thought about this, and he consulted with his friends. And they thought, okay, why don't we try to actually see if we can repair this? He went and he talked to people in the government to see if they would actually do something about the ambulance service. And when they didn't, Shafi decided, you know what, everybody's doing these social enterprises. People are talking about entrepreneurship. I'm going to do something about this. I'm going to solve this problem of a lack of ambulance and emergency care in India. I'm going to start with Mumbai, and I'm going to see where it goes. So he takes a year off, he goes to London, and he spends time with the London Ambulance Service. He learns everything there is to know about emergency care, which is a lot of it is about logistics. And he works with the London Ambulance Service, and he manages to get a number of ambulances donated to him in Mumbai. He comes to New York and he has meetings with various hospitals here, and he gets people to volunteer and he gets donations from them. He goes back to Mumbai. He raises some money to hire staff, and he puts all the elements of what he thinks this is going to solve the problem in India. He's going to solve, this one problem of a lack of a functioning emergency care service, at least in Mumbai. So what's the last part that he needs? He needs a phone number that people can call. He can't have a number like 911 because those are government numbers, and because he's going to run a for-profit company, he needs a different kind of a number. And they have special numbers like that for individuals in India. They're 4-digit numbers. He goes to register for this number, and he gets sent around. And he told me, he said, I knew that this would happen. He said, I grew up in India, and there's a lot of bureaucracy. There's a lot of people telling you to go to this office and go to that office. He said, so I had expected this. But after 3 months, it started to become tiresome having to go from office to office. Finally, he's told that if he wants that special number that's given to nonprofit organizations, then he needs to go to New Delhi. He needs to go to the capital of India, and he has to register with the Ministry of Telecommunications. So he goes, he's off to the capital of India, and he finally finds the guy where he's going to get the phone number. And the guy says, I have great news for you. I'm going to give you a really terrific phone number. It's going to be one that it's going to be easy for you to reach people. People are easily going to remember this phone number. So Shafi says, that's fantastic. This is all falling into place. This is all going to work. Everything's going to move forward. And the bureaucrat says, how much is it worth to you? He asks Shafi for the equivalent of $4,000 US. Now, Shafi wasn't surprised, again, that this bureaucrat was asking for what Shafi told me was chai pani. Chai pani is money for tea. And it's something that a lot of people in India, particularly bureaucrats, ask for. The concept, you give a couple of rupees and your paperwork moves along a little quicker. And it actually dawned on me when he was telling me the story about chai pani that word to grease a palm, it must emanate from this concept of trying to actually move things along a lot quicker. There's really nothing sinister in it. I think we do that here in the United States where we pay extra money for expedited services. What he was shocked by was this exorbitant amount of money that he was being asked for. And he certainly said, sir, certainly, that's certainly a really unreasonable for you to be asking that. And the bureaucrat said, no, if you don't pay me the equivalent of 4,000 US dollars, I'm not going to give you the number you want. That was the aha moment for Shafi. And when he was telling me this, I actually went back to what I remembered about this problem in Nigeria, where if you're an entrepreneur and you're only focused on solving a symptom, you're not really addressing the problem. And Shafi sat there and he thought, oh my God, what have I done? I have done all of this work, I have raised all of this money, and I'm about to launch this startup that is supposed to address this problem of emergency care in India, when the problem in India is actually not about emergency care and the capabilities of us doing this. The problem is trust. The problem in India is that there's this level of corruption and that there's this expectation that bureaucrats will ask people who are coming to them either for a license or an approval or a patent or whatever it is, and that people will pay this. And people in India don't believe in the public services. They don't believe that their elected officials can actually deliver on the promises that they have made or fulfill just basic services and needs such as ambulance care or whether it's operating the trains or the buses on time. And he thought that is actually the problem here in India, and I'm addressing the wrong issue. How do I build trust? And so that's my third, that was the third takeaway, which is Shafi's was this concept of trust, that this is the one thing that entrepreneurs, really successful ones, do, and it's what distinguishes them. They develop trust within the community, and Shafi thought, well, how do I do that? And as he was talking about that, he thought about the great companies in Silicon Valley, particularly companies like Google, and he thought, what are they doing? They're reaching out to people, they're listening to people, and they're connecting with people, they're building community. How can I do that now that I've started all this? And at that moment, Shafi thought, okay, here's what I'm going to do. Rather than actually focusing in on this concept of emergency care and the lack of ambulances, I'm going to go out and tell this story. So he looks at the bureaucrat and he says, I will not pay you that $4,000. And the bureaucrat says, okay, dude, no problem. Here's a number. I'm going to give you the number 1298. Now, if you think about it, 1298 is not a very memorable combination. It's not something you would actually remember. Shafi decided that he was going to take that number, and instead of actually going out and promoting the fact that he has this ambulance care that will answer your emergency phone number, he was going to go out and he was going to tell the story about what happened to him in that office. And he was going to talk to Indians about the fact that the reason that we're not able to actually move public services forward is not because we're not capable of it, because we lack so much trust. And we're going to build this trust up. And that is how India is going to fulfill its potential as this great global power. He went out with that message, and it resonated with people. People started using the service. More states in India requested Shafi and this company 1298 to actually come and roll out ambulance services in their state. 1298 now operates in all of the states within India, and it's actually exported its model to places like Singapore and to Dubai. And I thought, okay, well, this is a great example of here are the lessons for entrepreneurs. And so off I went, and I thought, okay, well, here I am in India in looking at this concept of trust. How do you build trust in a country like Pakistan? In a country where there's tremendous amount of insecurity, and when you turn on CNN, there are all these horrible news reports about how there are these bombings, and then just this morning there was a gunman who killed people at a university campus this morning. How do you actually build trust in a situation like that? How do you even start a company in such an insecure place? And I went to Pakistan, and I spent time with a number of tech entrepreneurs, and there's actually a quite considerable amount of a number of technology-based entrepreneurs in Lahore and in Karachi. And I spent time with Monis Rahman, who runs a company called Naseeb Networks. Naseeb Networks has two online platforms, the one being a dating website, because if you're an entrepreneur, why not start a dating website in Pakistan? The other one is a jobs website, and the jobs website was started as a result of the success of the dating website in Pakistan, because people want to find love. And when I spent time with Monis and understand how does his technology company works, what I actually realized is how you build trust in a country like Pakistan, and how do you address this issue of insecurity was one of many of the aha moments I have, but the one that I'll end on is this concept of the importance of space. And what Monis talked about was, he said the problem in Pakistan is that there's this perception that there's only one narrative, that it's all about insecurity. When insecurity and this problem of terrorism and violence in this country is only about 5% of what happens here in Pakistan. The rest of it doesn't actually get translated. And I said, but then how do you actually get people to actually talk about what is going on? He said, well, that's one of the reasons I started the companies that I did. He said, I came back to Pakistan. He went back to Pakistan from Silicon Valley. He was working at Intel, where he was working on building microchips. And he left that job, much like Bülent left Silicon Valley to go back to Turkey, because he saw an opportunity where the internet was going to change things. Technology itself is not the one big factor that is helping people start company, but it's helping change perceptions. And what he saw was one of the challenges in Pakistan was not only geographically is the country divided because it's in such rough terrain. So the country is divided into these 4 different regions and these 4 different tribal groups. And to get from point A to point B is very difficult. The country does suffer from a lot of poor infrastructure. But there's just not a lot of people being able to come together to share ideas. There's also the challenge in Pakistan where men and women are segregated a lot of the time. There are very few forums for people to actually come together in Pakistan, and those few forums are really, they are for men. You have the military where people are able to come together. You have the cricket field where people are able to come together for games. And then there's the university campus, but not a lot of people have access to university campus. And so he thought, well, here the internet, everybody's getting on the internet. This is going to be the one medium that's actually going to be able to get all Pakistanis on the same platform. So rather than wait for a lot of these Silicon Valley-based companies to come to Pakistan, I'm going to bring these forums to Pakistan for Pakistanis. And what I actually realized in him doing that is he's helping to actually change the perceptions, not only among Pakistan, but the greater world about what Pakistan is. And as a result of what Monis did in 2004 and what has happened since then is that he's been able to create this entire community of people who are coming together to build platforms on the internet, but also get people in Pakistan excited about entrepreneurship. Space continues to be a challenge for countries like entrepreneurship, for countries like Pakistan, and certainly that's something that needs to be addressed because you can't just build companies and interact with each other just on the internet. I think here on being in this building itself, I think you see the importance of people being able to come together to actually interact and to share ideas. And that was one of the big aha moments I had, where I actually thought insecurity was one of these things holding back, it was actually the lack of collaborative spaces. Because when you actually think about it, one of the things that Mona said to me is that if you think about it, Israel has an insecurity problem too. But nobody would actually say that Israel is not an innovative place. And I thought he was right, because Israel is actually known as the startup nation. But in Israel, people are actually able to come together and they're encouraged to share their ideas. The last place that I went to on my journey to write this book is to Silicon Valley. And that whole concept of space was actually really solidified for me, and really it drove it home. Because when you think about it, everybody talks about how do we replicate the story of Silicon Valley? How do we create the next Steve Jobs? How do we actually create the next Google? And it really comes down to space. There's a reason that there is this campus here, and that Google creates these opportunities for all of you to come together, because ideas are not created in and of themselves. This myth that the entrepreneur sits in a garage by him or herself, that is just not true. All of the great innovations that have come about as a result of people interacting with one another and engaging with one another and iterating and building on the various different ideas they have. The secret sauce of Silicon Valley that everybody's trying to unlock is really not really a secret. It's actually about community. And it's the one thing that actually I think Google has given to the world. It's been able to bring people together, and for people together and interact with one another, which is one of the reasons that Google is one of the most innovative companies in the world, and it's one of the reasons that people look to it as an example. And so the secret sauce of it is about community. I will end my talk there. I thank you very much, and I welcome you to ask any questions that you have if you would step up to the mics. Thank you.
Hello. Is this on? Oh.
Hi.
Evidently is. Hey, Elmira. Thanks so much for coming here.
Thanks.
I love what you've been working on. My name is Bilal. My family is originally from Pakistan, so that last story kind of hit home with me. So thinking about enterprise as a whole and the value that it brings, everyone in this room, I'm sure, being a part of Google values enterprise. But there's increasingly been this conversation about how does enterprise actually trickle down to the rest of society. And Oxfam recently released some numbers about the gap between rich and poor is increasing even in the US, and well, especially the US and the West. So as much as I love enterprise, do you see in the long run the value that's being created by these entrepreneurs in these developing countries? Do you see that having the same issues that we're having in the West? Will it eventually trickle down and build value for society, or will there just be another elite, wealthy sitting at the top?
Thanks for that, Bilal. That's a great question. I actually think that entrepreneurship is one of the greatest, and I say that in my book. I think that entrepreneurs have done more than any charity, philanthropy, or nonprofit organization or multilateral organization that I've seen. Going back to what I was saying before, entrepreneurs go in there and they're really solving the problems and challenges within their community. I think we want to there's this tendency to want to, tear down people in Silicon Valley and then, blame them for this growing inequality. I actually think that those are things that need to be addressed by government and on a policy level. I think what entrepreneurs are doing is they are adding value. And what I said before is that they're creating new channels for socioeconomic creation. So they're moving people forward. So they're not only creating jobs, they're creating opportunities, and they're bringing investments in. So whether it's Tayo in Nigeria or whether it's Monas in Pakistan, he's brought in venture capital money from the United States. And when you have people putting those type of investments there, there's a sense of not only ownership, but there's this sense that you want to actually make something succeed. And so there's a lot of criticism of people who are throwing a lot of money at a lot of technology startups. I actually think that's a really great thing. Does everything work out? No. And are there cons? Absolutely. But I think that we need to really be careful about how we use this word inequality and how we throw it around, and not assign that responsibility to the entrepreneurs. I think that's actually a responsibility of people in leadership.
Definitely. Okay, great. Thank you.
No more questions? Okay. Well, thank you so much for coming out. I appreciate it. Please buy a book.